computer. All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming early.
Morning.
And joining us. Thank you, Cheney's, for being willing to sit in the hot spot and asking some questions about 7th Street. Again, if you're joining us, we are recording this, guys. So just make sure you have pants on. But the idea behind it is just to capture history and stories, some favorite memories of 7th Street Christian Church, so that we can pass this information and these stories along. So it was a great hit with Nancy Garver last week. Thank you so much again, Miss Nancy. And so Cheney's, thank you guys for joining us. And next week we have Cheryl Loggy and Kirsten Sandiford. So I'm curious about those two tag teaming. We'll be entertaining. So
I'm definitely going to be here for that one.
All right. So I am curious. What was it about 7th Street that made y'all want to be a part of the community?
Well, the first time we visited, we went to a Sunday school class intentionally, and I was very impressed by the fact that questioning and discussion were, openly encouraged. And, I grew up in the Baptist church, that was very different, but I had been going to an Episcopal church, which I loved for much of the same reason. The fact that we had weekly communion was very important after having, attended Episcopal church for a while. Because again, when I was growing up Baptist, I think we had it once a month, which just always seemed odd to me. But anyway, those were a couple, other than the people, obviously, the people were terrific, but there were some specific things that I was looking for in a new church home. And they made my kids, my boys were engaged and stayed that way through high school, which was pretty awesome.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah,
See,
I credit Liz Hewlett, no doubt about it. I mean, the reason we were looking for a church was at the Episcopal church, the boys were just not happy. They didn't really get along with the kids that were there, and
they didn't know them.
Didn't know them very well.
Right.
It was all the way downtown, so there weren't people that lived near them or anything. Right. And they just, it got to the point where they didn't want to go to church, and we'd argue about it. We'd holler and we'd yell, and by the time we got to church, none of us were feeling very Christian. Not happy. And so we said, well, boys, we're going to go look. And I'll never forget the first Sunday, right after the service. And so Liz Hewlett came up and she said, I'm taking some of the youth and we're taking, dinner to a homeless shelter and so forth. And I wanted to ask Grayson to go, but, I wanted to check with you first and make sure that you didn't have a problem with it, and of course, Grayson at the previous church had done nothing. I mean, so forth. And so I'm going to Liz, I'm going, sure, Liz, I'd be real happy for you to ask him. Good luck. I can't imagine, And so she gets Grayson. She says, Grayson, do you want to go? Yeah, I'd love to go. Could have knocked me over with a feather, That's when I said, there's something special about this lady. And there is, right? Very special person. And, that means there's something special about the church. I need to figure it out.
Oh, thank y'all for sharing. Absolutely. We all know and love Liz Hewlett, and she's absolutely a gem. And and I think it just highlights the importance of engaging young people. Hogan and I this week were talking about like how we made our way to the church, and most of the stories all include connecting, knowing that we have a place and having, it's not necessarily even whatever a strong youth program, it's just knowing that we had a home and a place that we fit and could experience and our faith. And so, but that's fantastic. Missions and mission trips has been a big part of 7th Street Christian Church and their story. And so I'm just curious, what mission trips, well, I know that y'all have participated in mission trips, but so like what mission trips have you participated in, and what were some of the highlights?
I participated in mission trips with the youth, primarily when I was education chair. I got to know the youth, so I went on 3 mission trips with the kids, and one was to Monessen, Pennsylvania, and it's a really poor previous steel town, and it was quite an experience. We stayed in this big, huge, old high school, and we were housed in the gymnasium and the auditorium. The women were in one and the men were in the other, and you slept on sleeping pads, and no hair dryers or any. But it was the first time, and Chris Crowley and I took Taylor Martin, Gilly Martin, and Chris Cheney, and we drove my minivan, and we had to separate Gilly and Taylor because at the time they were teenage girls and they could not be in a room together for more than 5 minutes. So we literally had to put, one in the very back, one in the middle, and then Chris in between them, because so it was quite interesting, and it's a long way away. I mean, it's not a quick, easy drive, but we got there, and all of those kids were just incredible that week, working on all these different projects. We all got assigned to do different things, and it's the first time I ever experienced foot washing. It was truly one of the most profoundly moving things I have ever experienced, as it was for most every person there. I mean, it was just remarkable. So
was that part of like a worship service while y'all were there?
Yeah, it was like the next to the last evening, and so you'd done all this team building, and it was extraordinary. But it ended on a Friday morning, and we had to come back through Washington, D.C. at rush hour.
Oh.
It was like, what? I said, Chris, our planning was horrible. And it was too. It took us like 8 hours to get home. So we were very ready to come home by the time we did.
Absolutely.
And I had 2 other mission trips. One was we took the older youth, which again was Taylor, a young man named Jeff. What's Jeff's last name? Oh,
Myers?
Jeff Myers, and Grayson, and Teddy Slusher. I mean, not Teddy Slusher.
Stuart.
No, it was Teddy Slusher. It was the older one. Anyway, we went to D.C. and we stayed at the National Christian Church, and they had all these mattresses and stuff, and the kids just were so obnoxious, and they're like, sliding down the halls on the mattresses, and but they had a great time. And it was about 110 degrees in Washington, D.C. the next day when we went out to do sightseeing, but it was, they had a good time. And then I took the younger youth to Williamsburg for a long weekend and stayed at Mildred and Bruce's, Mildred and her husband's timeshare there, which they graciously lent us. And all of the kids who were told not to stay up all night stayed up all night. They were worthless the next day. We were trying to see Colonial Williamsburg, and all they did was whine, because again, it was about 100 degrees. These mission trips are in the summertime. They're tired, they're cranky. I was like, I'm gonna lose my mind. That was my last mission trip.
You passed the baton on to your husband, who's like, I have one question. So I've taken some kids up to National City Christian Church, and we snuck up in the spire. Did y'all do that?
No, no.
I just confessed them. Well, you missed out on a great view of the city.
I'm sure we did. Those are my mission trips.
Oh, thank you for sharing. Steve, I know you've been on several. Love to hear your highlights.
Yeah, 2006, 2007, and 2008, for 3 straight summers, we took mission trips down to the Gulf Coast.
Yeah.
The first year we stayed in Gulfport, Mississippi, in the
Church.
Christian Disciples of Christ Church there, which was about 3 streets back from the ocean.
Wow.
Right? And it was damaged, you know, in this almost a year later, we were staying there because they had finally gotten it ready enough so that we could stay there. We were in the education wing, sleeping upstairs. They had finally kind of fixed the kitchen enough so that we could eat. The sanctuary was still unusable completely.
Oh my gosh.
And the only reason the Christian church was still there was because the huge First Baptist Church of Gulfport had been on the seaward side and had taken the brunt. And the First Baptist Church, the roof was there, everything below the roof was gone. It was held up with the steel girders and everything, but
Wow.
there was nothing else. And of course, you know, a year later they had cleaned up the mess, but you know, it was just, the whole thing was going to have to be eventually taken down and replaced. Although I think they were actually talking about rebuilding a little more inland.
Yeah.
A lot of people after that did this. So, you know, and we went out and helped the Disciples of Christ. We had a Disciples of Christ person who had, you know, set up projects to work on this, and we did different things. Remember Terry Hewlett, oh my God, engineer, right? And he took on helping to get the church in better shape. We were the first group to stay at that church, and there were other groups scheduled after us, you know, and Terry said, well, we need to fix this door, and we need to, and he just, you know, he took all that on. He was amazing, just amazing.
We heard about Terry making sure the door was perfect before it was painted.
Absolutely. He had standards, you know, and you had to meet them. And so the second year we went to, I think, Slidell, and again we traveled around, and I'll never forget, there was a disciples minister who had lived there, and his, you know, family was now living in Midwest somewhere, Missouri, and we needed to help him because his house had been badly damaged, was unlivable, you know, so forth, but had not been declared totaled. Mm. If they declared your house total, FEMA hauled it off for you. They just, you know, they took everything, and his was not, but needed to be completely gutted. Mm-hmm. And they said, you have like a month more to gut your house and put everything on the street, and we will haul it off. But after this month, oh, you're on your own. Yep. You know, you'll have, and so we gutted his house, and I mean, gutted. Down to the stud walls, everything else, you know, all appliances, all the toilet, the shower, the bathtub, I mean, just gutted. And he had 2 young sons, and I was cleaning out one of the closets, and there were a bunch of Little League trophies, you know, and so I didn't want to just toss out trophies. Kids had won, and you know, so I went to him and I said, I found these in the boys' room and so forth, and wondered if you wanted to save them. And I'll never forget. He said, actually, he said, my boys don't want to see or know about anything connected to this home. And it broke my heart.
Oh, wow.
It just broke my, and the stories that you heard, you hear how bad, devastation is in a whole, not just a city, a whole region, right? And, one of the things we did was we would talk to people about their story, what they had done during the storm and what had happened to their home in their town. And it was stunning, right? And we went back the next summer to Slidell again. And, the ones in Slidell, we were staying at the First Christian Church of Slidell, Disciples of Christ. And we, both years, we stayed with a bunch of other mission trip people from other churches. So we never had really big groups, but, we did stay with a bunch of other people.
Yeah.
And so forth, and had some interesting things. I remember one day we took and we rode into New Orleans, and this was the second Slidell trip. So this is 3 years after Katrina hit, and we're driving into New Orleans, and I'm looking at whole apartment complexes. Huge apartment complexes. Squatters are the only people living there. They're not repaired. They're not fixed. And the guy that was helping us with all of it, he said, "Oh yeah," he said, people with individual houses. He said, "Oh, their insurance paid and so forth, and a whole bunch of them have rebuilt." But he said the rental places, it's just not worth it to them,
Right,
to rebuild. And he said, this 3 years later, he pointed out one apartment complex, and he said, that one's reopened. And he said, you can imagine in a city, he said the majority of the working people in the city don't own a home. No, they rent, right? And just stories and stories,
yeah.
over and over again about, and what he said there were two storms. He said the one was Katrina, the physical storm. And he said then after that was the storm of the incompetence of all of the people that were supposed to do something that just didn't get it done.
Yeah.
And he said people suffered through both of them.
Well, they're still suffering. I mean,
Oh.
there are still parts of New Orleans and that area that were poor, and nothing has been rebuilt. Mostly they've been raised and their foundations sitting there, anyway, but yeah, so.
Thank y'all for sharing. Yeah, I took a college group 2 years after than your trip, so 5 years after Katrina, and things were still being rebuilt. And I'm proud to say, like, as a denomination, the disciples are still there and still working and committed themselves to that response.
Yeah.
So that's where, like, when we give offering to Week of Compassion, Disciples Home Mission,
Absolutely true.
all of that is what helped support that. And we too stayed in Slidell at First Christian Church, who moved their mission as a place to welcome people to help rebuild that area. So I'm so glad that 7th Street was part of that history of rebuilding. It's sad. I wish that wasn't the case, right? Like, I wish it hadn't happened, but yeah, that devastation was awful. So a quick
and then I can't go without talking about last summer.
Okay.
Oh yeah, please.
Right, and going with Jamie and her church, because the 3 times we went to Gulf Coast, I was kind of trip leader, right? And the wonderful thing about last summer's was her church has been doing this for 25 years or something. I mean, just every summer they go someplace. And it was really nice to watch leaders that knew what they were doing. You know, and knew how you're supposed to do these things.
It's nice not to be in charge. Like that's also a benefit. Remind me where y'all went last summer.
Maine.
And
Yeah.
and look, that's, you know what? It was that trip that's Jamie Babsack realized that she was like, oh, this is beautiful. And it's what allowed her to consider a call there. That mission trip, actually. So that's
really was beautiful. And I worked the whole time on, or the majority of us worked the whole time on a little complex of mobile homes, which is the transition area they have for homeless people.
Yeah.
They'll get them in mobile homes and until they get back on their feet and you know, get a job and can work through. And wonderful people, you know, all the people were living there while we were working, you know, and just great.
Well, thank y'all. we got a few more minutes, and I don't even know what question. There's a couple more questions, and we won't have time for them all. But I definitely want to get in, at least in your opinion, where do you see God at work currently at 7th Street Christian Church?
In the people. You know, it's funny, you know, when I started going to college, I grew up in the church, started going to college, and I quit going to church for a pretty long time. And, you know, I told myself I was a Christian, you know, and I used to say, well, you know, I don't go to church because, you know, shoot, I can see God and be with God out in the woods. You know, I don't need to be in a building. And when I started going back to church, I realized, no, you need to be with other Christians. You really do, because they inspire you to be a better Christian. And, you know, gosh, the people that inspire me here, my favorite is Outreach, you know, Loretta Taylor, Olivet Cox, Liz Hewlett participates whole bunches of Outreach.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm just, I gotta say it. Okay, Pat Mays is the hardest working person
Absolutely.
I have ever known in my whole life. She outworks any 6 other people.
I think she's cloned because she shows up to everything. I don't know how she does it. Pat, I know on this call, I'm convinced that there's 7 of you.
Yeah. And she does what she does with the right heart. And it's incredible. It's incredible to watch her show up for everything and do it joyfully and happily, and you know, so
absolutely.
Thank you.
That's so funny, because I was like, one of my questions are there saints in the past that have had an impact on your life? And well, Pat is most certainly a saint and still with us, and we give thanks for that. I'm glad you highlighted that.
As is St. Mary Rose.
Yeah, well,
St. Mary Rose.
As is Nancy Garver.
You know, your questions.
You know, your
question says, "Are there seats?"
I know.
In the past, and I was like, I don't think that's what she means, really. So
that's the problem with voice to text. Yeah, I didn't check that. So I didn't mean saints. Are there saints that in the past that had a big impact on your life? You've mentioned Terry Hewlett, most certainly a saint. Yeah, are there others that come to mind?
Not Kay Coates, who is Mary Bennett's mother. I don't know if you know Mary and John Bennett, Laura, good friends of Laura Richards. Anyway, Kay Coates, when we first came to the church, she was chair of education, and she got me involved, and then I was chair of education for I don't know how many years, a long time. Because you know what it's like once you're chair, nobody wants to take over.
I don't know.
Nobody wants to take over, but she was
kind of like being board chair. Yeah.
Yeah, she was wonderful. And I mean, you know, and Kay sang in the choir, she just was a great, great lady. And, you know, I miss her a lot. And, you know, and Mary Beth Bennett, our choir director, is not, she's still with us, fortunately, but she was extraordinary. I mean, when we first came to the church, Steve joined the choir before I did. I was probably 2 or 3 years, at least 2 years behind him joining the choir, because I wasn't particularly fond of the choir director. And then we got Mary Beth, who was nothing short of remarkable. I mean, she could get music from us, very small group, most of whom did not read music or, you know, weren't trained. And I mean, one of my favorite things was working on our cantatas for each December, each Advent. And they were, I mean, we did the Rudder Requiem. We did amazing things under her leadership. So,
Small but mighty.
So I miss her a lot. And Mildred Bruce. Mildred has always been an inspiration to me.
Claude Garver. I can't go without speaking about Claude. Great person. You know, just a wonderful, wonderful person.
Oh, thank you guys. Well, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add. If you have other favorite memories of 7th Street that you want to share as we bring this particular interview to a close, I want to give people a few minutes to go have, you know, prepare for worship in whatever ways they may need to. So anything you want to add at the end, any favorite memories or anything else?
I have, this will be quick. And I have one, well, I have a number of favorite memories, but being in the choir, obviously you sit up in the choir loft. So you have a little different perspective than the folks sitting out in the church. And so you can see very clearly the communion trays. And one of my dearest friends in my life, Charlotte McDowell, who was a member of the church and is no longer with us, she was a communion steward. And she had gone in to prepare communion that morning and forgot to put anything in the communion tray on her side. And there were 2 communion stewards, right? When they each, so, and being a soprano, I'm on the very first row of the choir loft. And so when the deacon who was serving took the lid off that tray, and there was Jennifer Parrish, took the lid off that tray, and there was nothing there. I thought she was going to run away. I mean, she really didn't know what to do. And we got the giggles, the choir did. And I mean, I thought I was going to have to leave the church. I was doubled over laughing so hard. And I just will never forget it. And so I just kind of made eye contact with her and said, just go, you know, like, just go. Y'all will figure it out. And I don't know who was serving with Jennifer that day. It was probably Cheryl Loggy, because Cheryl kept a cool head, and just when she got to the end, there still was plenty of stuff. So she just went over and took over for Jennifer's, but it was priceless. And Charlotte said, this is the best thing about it. Charlotte said, what does a girl have to do around here to get fired from a job?
That ain't enough. that won't do it. No.
So, anyway, that's one of my favorite memories.
Oh.
And the last thing I'm going to say, you had the question about what leadership position. I've been board chair twice, you know, and I don't think I was definitely a really good fit for that kind of job. I did the best I could. That's all you do. I've been outreach committee for as long as I've been there, property committee, you know, I've done a few other things, but I did want to mention the one job I had where I did, by golly, the best job I could possibly do. I was head of the search committee that brought Holly Woodruff to 7th Street Christian Church, you know, and so I'm going to wear that feather in my hat,
right?
You know, forever.
Well, and I was part of the search committee that brought Carolyn Schwartz, and then I was board chair, and we hired Chuck Rowland as our intentional interim, which you know, they both amazing people. So yeah, it's a privilege to get to do those kinds of things that are so important to the church.
It is. I mean, those kinds of committees and leadership. I mean, I think every role of leadership is so critical, but there's something to serving on certain timely committees, like a search committee, that really, I mean, you're responsible for discerning so much, right?
Yep.
Like,
Yep.
you know, God's call on the church, conversations with prospective leaders and pastors, and those decisions really are what can change, lead, I mean, direct the
Right.
attention of the church for the future, for, I mean, who knows how long. So thank y'all. Thank you guys so much for your time today. Thank you for one of the questions I didn't ask is, how long have y'all been a part of 7th Street? Like over 20 years, right?
Probably not quite, but getting close. We came after 9/11, so it's probably been close to 19 years, going on 20. Yeah.
So, well, thank you guys so much for your time today. Thank you for your leadership at 7th Street, your continued ministry to us. Thank you. And yeah, so let's see.
And I've got to say thank you to all of the members of 7th Street for being such Christian examples to help me, because I need it. I need help how to be a Christian, right?
You know, yeah,